Joining me right now on the phones, representing District 83, State Representative Dustin Burrows, who is down in Austin. State Representative Burrows, good morning.
Good morning, Chad. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. How are things down in Austin right now?
Well, kind of like Lubbock, a little cold, a little overcast, a little rainy, but things are going well. The House has formed committees. We have our assignments and getting to work.
Well, tell the audience about the assignments you received and just a little bit about the work you'll be doing.
So, committee assignments for me is agriculture and livestock. So, obviously, I have some bills aimed at protecting our farmers going forward, and so those bills will go through that. Also with the livestock, there's been a big fever tick outbreak and some other issues threatening our cattle industry. So, we'll have an opportunity to weigh in and make sure we have good policy for that going forward. The other committee in the House is going to be the Financial Services and Investment Committee. That mainly is looking out for our banks, and especially our rural banks. There's always a series of bills that gets filed that go through that committee that would overregulate and harm the ability of our community banks from doing their job. So we'll have an opportunity to weigh in on that. And then on the Republican side, I'm actually on the Policy Committee. So I'll be working with 15 of my colleagues from across the state to weigh in on all the bills that come to the floor and decide whether or not they actually live up to the values of the Republican Party, and if not, work against those.
Very cool. I think when people first look at the committee assignments and they see agriculture and livestock, for a lot of folks, and not to take anything away from investments and financial services, obviously with community banks, that's a big player out here, but ag. We've heard so much, even in the, you take it up a level to the District 19 race that we went through last year. Agriculture played a big role, and there's been a little bit of a focus on agriculture even during the presidential campaign. So that's got to be a big win for you.
Yeah, no, it is. I asked for the committee last session. I've asked for it again this session. My background, some may know I've represented cotton farmers for, the big part of my career and tried to deal with some ag issues and making sure our guys are protected out here from kind of a changing global environment. So very much I sought after the committee, very proud to be on it, and glad we have a voice on that committee in the Texas Legislature.
Well, what do you think are going to be some of the top issues, ag-related issues, going through the legislature and going through the House in this session?
Well, a couple of the things. We're going to be taking a second look at the agricultural lien bill, which actually was Senator Perry's bill. I worked with him a lot last session. I know that we're trying to make sure it works for cotton. The other bill that I think is going to be a big bill is, of course, one I filed to make sure these international merchants can't sue our farmers on estimates when they grow cotton on acreage contracts. So that bill is going to be go through there. And we're going to look for other ways that we can protect our farmers from, a global market where you have some bad actors, especially from overseas, that are kind of coming in and doing some damage to our industry.
Visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows on the show. I also hear we always like to hear about some bills that will be filed that will improve government, and you've got a few bills that will be filed pretty soon that aim to improve government and accountability. Correct?
Yes, I actually filed them about 15 minutes ago, so it's been a busy morning.
Very cool. Tell our audience a little bit about those bills.
Okay, House Bill 1839. This is actually a bill that Senator Van Taylor filed last session. I actually was working on it with him during appropriations budget night last session, and I'm carrying it for him in the House. And what it does is it says every state agency, each and every year, needs to tell us how in the world they can cut 1%, 5%, and 10% of their budgets. And the idea is the agencies right now just assume that taxpayers are a bottomless well, and that year after year, whatever we appropriated last year is automatically goes into their baseline and should only be increased. This bill causes them to have to go through and see where they can cut. And it's a fiscally responsible bill. It was a policy actually implemented by Mayor Giuliani at the time to try to bring some expenditures in New York City under control. It worked for him. It's good policy, and proud to carry it with Senator Van Taylor.
This is something that you'll probably get a little bit of pushback on from some of those state agencies, I assume, right?
Well, that's what we're down here for. I mean, they might push back, but it's good policy, and we'll have to fight for it.
Let's see, oil and gas revenue is something that you're taking a look at as well, correct?
So, well, the next bill I filed is actually going to be dealing with, I've got two other bills I filed this morning, and one of them deals with a study. So right now, this is House Bill 1840. And what I found kind of in the course of the interim is state agencies, whenever they want something done, they go and they request one of our universities to do a study for them. And that study miraculously always seems to come back about 30 days before session starts, and it tries to lead policymakers to a conclusion. And so from what I saw is, this is essentially, agencies trying to weigh in and create policy and craft it. And all I want to know is if a state agency actually requests a study from a university, I'd like to have notice of it in 30 days so I can see what result they're trying to lead us to. And I saw this with the CPS work group on and going through county affairs where the previous commissioner had requested some information about, the correct pay raises for CPS workers and things like that. And after 6 months of kind of diving into the issue, somebody said, well, there's a study that's coming out in December, and I was surprised by that. And we'd just like a little heads up before those things actually hit to where the agency is trying to direct us so we have some better oversight.
And what is the third bill that you filed today?
Okay, we're calling this in my office Audit the LBB. So the LBB, the Legislative Budget Board, does a lot of things. But most importantly to my bill, they actually come up with a fiscal note. So every time a bill is actually filed and it's making its way to the House floor, LBB does an estimate of what the impact is going to be on the state budget, and then they determine whether or not they think there will be an impact on county governments, school governments, and municipal governments. And we rely heavily on those budget estimates, those fiscal notes, to make a determination of whether or not this is good legislation or not. And they're supposed to, kind of think about whether or not they got it right. But there's really not a whole lot of oversight going forward to determine did those fiscal notes get it right or not. So I've asked the LBB to put under the sunset process and for the comptroller to step in and audit those fiscal notes and report to us, did LBB get it right or not, so that we can begin correcting times when they were less than accurate.
Visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the show. So 3 bills filed this morning. You have been busy so far this morning. Let me ask you about the pace of the session. And I know everybody wants everything to get started quickly. It never does. It's not designed to down in Austin. But you see the Senate side, they've already gotten sanctuary cities out, some of the emergency bills that they're already taking a look at from the governor, including sanctuary cities. Are you okay with the speed the House is working? Are you disappointed? What are your feelings on that?
Look, there's only 31 senators, so they probably need to get a jump start on things because there's fewer of them. There's 150 of us in the House. We're going to get to sanctuary cities. I feel reasonably confident we're going to pass a sanctuary cities bill in the Texas House, and we're going to get to those emergency items. And I think we'll get to them in due order and plenty of time to make sure they pass and become good law.
Is there a back and forth between the House and the Senate? And one of the reasons I bring this up is when I had you in studio, it was either the last time or the time before last, you seem to take issue with the Senate calling themselves the most conservative. We're the conservative ones. We're the most conservative. There seems to be a little bit of a back and forth between House members who want to separate themselves and say, "Hey, stop pushing us. We're a conservative body too. You're not the only conservatives." Is there that friction between the two chambers?
I talked to some members who've been around here for a long time, and they said there's always been a back and forth between the Senate and the House. I mean, we want all of our ideas to become the law. They want all of their ideas. And so democracy is built on, debate, dissent, and, having these types of discussions. What I can tell you and everybody listening is there are some very thoughtful, good conservative members in the Texas House. There's a lot of them. I work with them daily. They have great conservative ideas, and we're going to push some of those to the top, and some of those are going to become law. And my point would be this, is despite, any general characterizations of either body, there are some really good Republican conservative members in the Texas House, and we're going to pass meaningful policy this session. I believe it.
I want to ask you about a story that came out in the Texas Tribune yesterday, and we've talked about CPS and CPS reform and dealing with Child Protective Services. A story came out yesterday about sex trafficking and CPS, and I'm just going to read a portion from the Texas Tribune. 86% of missing children suspected of being forced into sex work came from child welfare systems, national data shows. A state-funded study estimated that the vast majority of young victims in Texas had some contact with Child Protective Services. Interviews with law enforcement and child advocates around the state tell a similar story. How does this factor in to the state and the House dealing with CPS and an overhaul of that program? Because these are very sad numbers that we see in this story.
Chad, and it's not just that story and those numbers. There's a lot of really sad situations that we've heard about and learned about. You know, I've been working on this for over a year now, and CPS needs reform. It needs an overhaul. I mean, there's some good that goes on within the system. I don't want to tell you that we don't have some good people working in there, but it needs more funding. It needs more employees. It needs the investigators need a lighter caseload, and we need to do a better job for our children. And stories like this only encourage us to take a harder look and to move even more expeditiously on it this session.
Visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows, what's on your plate the rest of this week before we let you go?
Well, we've got a couple more days of convening in the House. Obviously, committees are getting formed, so we're going to have some general orientation later in the week on some of the committees so that we can hit the ground running, and then just a couple more bills that we're working on. Bill filing deadline is getting close to us. This is the last week to have bills drafted. And so there's a couple last things that we want to work on and get into the discussion about good policy. So we're going to finish those up, getting ready for filing either this week or the next week, get those laid down so we have our full legislative agenda out there, and hope to get back on the show and be able to visit about some of those bills and make the progress we're making on the others we've already filed.
Absolutely. Anytime, State Representative Dustin Burrows. Appreciate your time. As always, we'll visit with you down the road.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you. That's State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show.